First of all, I want to ask you something. We all know, when we have been to these kind of conferences, we all come across the testimony and we all come across the stories of people. The stories of people, like how they received Christ. Some of the story might go like this. I received Christ because when I was sick, when I was prayed for, I got healed. That's true. Lots of you have heard this story from many people. And some of them might say, well, I became a Christian because this message that was preached by a preacher was so touching to my life that I could not resist not believing. That's true. How many of you have heard that story? Can you raise your hands? Yes. I'll be doing lots of raising hands, so be prepared. So, we have all heard those kinds of story, but we have rarely heard a story in which a person says, oh, I came to know God because of science. Oh, I was doing experiments. I was doing lots of researches. And at last, I found God. Do we often hear that kind of story? Do we? No. And yes, it's true. We even think that the people who are studying science, they don't believe God exists. So saying, I became a Christian because of science, that would be far-fetched. So we think science is anti-God. Science is at constant war with God. And you might think, how can someone come to Jesus? How can someone know God because of science? Well, here is something new for you. I'm going to walk you through my presentation how science points towards God. Okay? And how many scientists, they found God by their own scientific researches. So, now let me start with a story. All of us, we like a story, don't we? We've heard lots of stories from lots of preachers, and they were all wonderful. Let me add one more story to that list. This is a story of a man who was born 200 years ago. He was born in very wealthy family. His father was a doctor. And this person, the family background was a Christian background. And this person took Bible literally. And he believed that Bible is the ultimate authority of morality. And this person is a very interesting person. How many of us would give the career in medical field if we had a chance? If you had a chance in medical field? Probably very few of us. But this person, he had this possible future in medicine as a doctor, medical doctor. But he gave up this medical field because he found it too dull, too boring. And another interesting thing about this person is he used to keep a list of good aspects and bad aspects on marriage, like the pros and cons list. We all know what is a pros and cons list, don't we? And he used to write some funny things in the pros list and in the cons list. For example, I will say, in the positive aspects of getting married, he used to write, constant companion and a friend in old age, better than a dog anyhow. While in the negative aspects of marriage, the consulate, he used to write things like less money for books and terrible loss of time. I think you know what I mean, or what he means here. So, however, he ends up getting married to his cousin, okay? And they bear 10 children. And among those 10 children, 2 of them die at very infancy. And one of them, the daughter, dies in the age of 10. And this death of his beloved daughter would have devastating effect on him. And he would ask questions like, if there is a God, why would he let happen such kind of misery to me? And that's called the problem of evil, which we have all dealt. If there is God, why there is such a misery in the world? And this would shatter his belief in God. The death of his 10-year-old children. But that was not the end of his story. He would eventually make a very, very profound scientific discovery. And he would write a book, a very, very famous book, which would change the course of history of science. And this person became so famous. This person became so honorable that when he died, at the age of 73, he was buried beside Sir Isaac Newton. How many of we have heard Sir Isaac Newton? This person, in the honor of this person, he was buried beside Sir Isaac Newton in Westminster Abbey. His book, which shook the scientific community, was called The Origin of Species. And his theory was the theory of evolution. I guess by now you know who I am talking about. Yes, Charles Robert Darwin. Again, we have heard of Darwin. Can we raise hands? Yes. So this Darwin would propose the theory of evolution, and he would write this book called The Origin of Species, which became the foundation for the atheists. Why it became the foundation for the atheists? Because the evolution, the idea of evolutions eliminates the necessity for a God. In other words, evolution teaches us that we don't need a God to create a life. The nature itself can form a life from a very non-living things. Some kind of very simple molecules, when they are given enough time, they can form a life. First, the simple life, and in time, it will change into a very complex life. So that precludes the necessity of God. So in evolution, there is no place for God. And when Darwin proposed this theory of evolution, lots of people, they abandoned this faith. It seemed reasonable for them. Let me tell you another story of another man who is more recent than Darwin. He became atheist. We all know what is an atheist, right? Who does not believe in God. He became an atheist influenced by the secular teachings of the evolution. I think we all studied evolution in our science class during our high school. Similarly, this person also, he studied science, and he was taught evolution in the high school, and he became an atheist by the time he was in the college, because evolution teaches you don't need God to form a life. And this person received his bachelor's degree in journalism from University of Missouri and Master of Studies in Law degree from Yale. He was the former award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune, and his atheistic view was all to change. There was to come all drastic change in his life when his wife became Christian. Okay? And he thought, oh, this must be divorce now. Because you can imagine a couple having different sets of belief. What kind of discussions they might have. So, in our Nepalese culture also, when one of the spouse is Hindu and one of the spouse is Christians, how many troubles they have, how many debates they have, we can imagine. And similarly, this person also had the same kind of debate. He was an atheist, but his wife became a Christian. He thought it was a divorce. But before he gave up on his marriage, he decided to investigate. Is there really a God? He decided that he will investigate. And as a matter of fact, he investigated, and from what he found, his all atheistic beliefs were to shatter into pieces and become a Christian. And he would in turn challenge the theory of evolution in favor of the creation. This atheist turned Christian would go on to become a pastor and would write more than 24 of Christian books, which would put him in the list of New York Times bestseller and would win him lots of honorable awards. Not just that, he would be honored with Doctor of Divinity as an honor for his contributions to the evangelical community. And he would be called evangelical community's most popular apologist by Washington Post. And he would appear in lots of national televisions like ABC, Fox, PBS, and CNN, and his papers on Christianity would appear in lots of papers like Wall Street Journal, Newsweek. And you might be wondering who that person is. I'm talking about Lee Strobel. I don't know how many of you have heard about Lee Strobel. If you have heard, can you please raise your hand? Yes. There are a few who have heard of Lee Strobel, who is still alive, by the way. And he's the author of best-selling books like Case for Faith, Case for Christ, Case for Real Jesus, and Case for a Creator. In fact, lots of my presentation talk is inspired by his book called The Case for a Creator and his talks. And he has helped lots and lots of people to deepen in their faith. Lee Strobel said in his book, "My road to atheism was paved by science, but ironically, so was my later journey to God." So this might seem quite strange. How can science lead somebody to Christ? You might think science only talks against God. So, but within this time I have, I will try to show you how science powerfully points towards God. But first of all, I want to talk about something about evolution. We all know, we are all familiar with this picture, the monkey becoming a man. Very, very famous picture on evolution. Now, what is evolution? Evolution is just, simply put, evolution is the theory which tries to explain how the organisms that we see now came to be. And what does it say? The life right now we have, they all come from the very, very simple life which existed in very, very distant past. and which in turn they developed from non-living molecules. So, what is this saying here? So this is a purely naturalistic philosophy. What is meant by naturalism? Naturalism means everything that we see, every organism we see today, they all came from the natural process, without the intervention of some divine force, without the intervention of some kind of natural force. Whatever we have in these days, whatever the organisms, living things we see, they all came from the natural process. In other words, there is no room for God in evolution. There is no room for God in evolution. Evolution says, no, God did not create us. We have developed from very, very tiny atoms, molecules. They form into small, very tiny, simple form of life, which, again, in time, they evolve into more complex, eventually into the form that we are now. And what are the implications of this? That means nothingness created the logical reasoning in our mind. The nothingness created the art, and we were singing, and and our friends were playing. We have such an ability for creation, for ability for arts, music, that all came out of just nothing. Evolution says it came out of nothing. Okay? So even our sense of right or wrong, even our belief system, it is nothing. It is just the system built by people to survive. That's what evolution teaches us. And I will show you some of the evidences used by evolutionists to claim that evolution is true. And if you have taken science in your high school, you might be very familiar with these evidences that the evolutionists use to claim that evolution indeed happened. I'll walk you through this. First, there is this famous Stanley Miller experiment in 1953. What he did was, okay, this is a flask here. In this flask, he used the mixture of gas like ammonia, hydrogen, methane, and water vapor. And he passed electricity current through this. And this was all to simulate the earlier atmosphere during the formation of the Earth. The electrical current, the spark will simulate the lightning in the very earlier stage of the Earth. And what he found was he found some amino acid formed at the bottom of this flask. And what is amino acid? Yes, amino acid is the building blocks of protein. And what is protein? We are all made of a protein, right? We are the manifestation of protein besides other things. So now based on these experiments, if I can pass electricity in the mixture of gas, just like ammonia, methane, if it can form amino acid, then there is a very, very good chance in the very early Earth that such kind of gases existed, and due to some kind of lightning, amino acid formed, and this amino acid they've combined into protein. It gave rise to some kind of life form, and that life form eventually developed into a more complex life form, and that more complex life form again evolved into something like us. Given enough time, millions of years. That's what is the claim of this experiment, Stanley Miller experiment. So he found a mixture of amino acid. But is that really true? Is that really true? When I was a student, when I was in high school, my teacher taught to me that. And back then, I believed him because he was a teacher. He is supposed to know everything, right? How we trust our teachers. We think teachers know a lot. And back then, like, who was I to say you're wrong? But my later studies, I came to this conclusion, these findings. Actually, there is no proof that the earlier atmosphere in the earlier stages of Earth, there was no proof that there were those exact same kinds of gases. For example, here, I'm sorry. Lots of transitions, I'm sorry about that. Like ammonia, hydrogen, methane, and water vapor, which he started with, there is no proof. Scientists are now absolutely sure that there is no proof that the earlier atmosphere composed of such kind of gases. That means if there was no such kind of gases, amino acids could not have formed. And scientists did not sit quiet. If the early atmosphere did not have these kinds of gases, then let's experiment with the gases which was actually there in the earlier atmosphere. And they actually indeed lots of experiments to form the amino acid. And do you know what is the result? They got nothing. They got nothing. So, please, I want you to remember this. We, as Christians, we have been taught, on morality, do this, do that, do not do this. That's all good. But when it comes to our faith, we should be able to defend our faith. Do you agree? We should be able to defend our faith, especially in this post-modern world. There are so much scientific discoveries, so much technologies, and in this time, it is very difficult to defend our faith. And I want you to be able, when we finish this talk, have that kind of ability to defend your faith when you go outside in the world, when you go outside among your friends who study science. So I want you to pay very close attention. I even asked you to make notes. Later on, it would come handy if you go to the group discussions. So now there is a second proof that his experiment failed. He was careful in making his experiment to exclude oxygen, thinking that very early period, the Earth, there was no oxygen. Now, if there is no oxygen, what happens is the sun's ultraviolet light, they can destroy the amino acids. So even if we got the amino acids, there is no chance that it can survive because of lack of oxygen. And when there is no oxygen, there is no ozone layer. We all know what is ozone layer, don't we? It protects us from harmful ultraviolet lights. Now, in chemistry, I think I will walk you through this chemistry class. There is a term called chirality. It seems a fancy word, but I will try to explain in simpler ways. Like our hands, we have our hands, right? If we put a mirror between these two hands, you will see how they are exact mirror images of each other, right? This hand is mirror image of this hand, or this hand is a mirror image of this hand. But when you try to overlap, what happens? They do not overlap. And that's what chirality is. Chirality means right-handedness and the left-handedness. And in the chemical world, there are that kind of molecules which are right-handed and which are left-handed. And you might not know this, all the amino acids in our body, they all are left-handed. That means they have this specific type of chirality. Now, in the Miller's experiment, he got the amino acids of both chirality, right-handedness and left-handedness, which is useless for the formation of protein. My friends, are you getting my point? This claim, these very experiments, which have been taught for decades in high school, is wrong. Now the question arises, why is still being taught? I will leave that question to you. And not only that, there is tremendous, vast amount of information is stored inside our cell, in DNA. We will see that later on. Okay? And that could not have just arrived by evolution. The evolution tells us that we are here by chance. Okay? So, this Sir Fred Hoyle, he's a very famous scientist, once he said, evolutionists are asking us to believe that a tornado can pass through a junkyard and assemble a jumbo jet. Do you know how unlikely is that? Have you ever seen a tornado going through a junkyard and forming a big jumbo jet plane? And evolutionists are asking us to believe when they say our information inside our body came out of chance. Chance cannot form the magnificent body that we have, that vast storage of information we have. And he also compared the chance of obtaining even a single functioning protein by chance combination of amino acids to a solar system full of blind men solving Rubik's cubes simultaneously. Do you know what is a Rubik's cube? Yeah, it has different colors, and you solve it when you match all the colors in that cube, all the 6 faces in that cube. Right? So, when evolutionists say that amino acids, at a given enough time when it forms the protein, it's like saying that, imagine the solar system composed of blind people, and they are playing this Rubik's puzzle, and they all simultaneously, they solve these Rubik's puzzles. That's unlikely. And that's also unlikely when evolutionists say that proteins came out of amino acids by chance. For the sake of time, I don't think I will have time to go through all of the slides, so I will skip through a few of the slides. And again, to say that the small molecules combine to form proteins, it's like doing an experiment like a rock falling upwards all the way to the moon. Like if you take a rock and you want to do an experiment to try to make it try to fall upwards to the moon, how unlikely is that? People will say that's stupid, that's never going to happen. Actually, that will never happen. But yet, evolutionists are throwing at us constantly these kinds of things that we came here by chance. The amino acids, the molecules, the single cell life in the primitive world, they all came by chance. And that's how unlikely it is. So, that's how we can defend evolution is not true. Okay? And there is a professor at Texas A&M University, Walter Bradley. He said, I think people who believe that life emerges naturalistically need to have a greater deal more faith than people who reasonably infer that there's an intelligent designer. Do you know what does this mean? That to believe that our life on earth came out of just chance, they need far more faith than to believe that there is a God who created the living beings on the earth. Okay? Now, again, this is a very familiar picture. How many of you remember this? If you have taken the high school science class. What is this saying? This is the picture of embryos. This is the picture of embryos. Here is a fish here, and here is the turtle, and I don't know what else is there. Chicken, maybe, and here is the human baby. So, and here are the drawings of the very first, very earlier stage of the embryos, and there is a little bit later, and this is even later drawings. Now, what do they claim? What the evolutionists claim is, if these all animals, which look so different when they fully develop, if they look very similar in their embryonic stage, then they must have originated from the common ancestor. When we think, oh, this makes sense, right? This makes sense, okay? But let me tell you one secret. Do you know who drew this picture? Who was the first person draw this picture? It was called Haeckel. And let me tell you one secret. This drawing is false. If you don't believe me, when you go home, try to do some research and type the Haeckel's drawing and what are the controversies regarding. This is not true. He intentionally manipulated the drawings. The actual drawings of embryos in this earlier stage is nothing like this. He intentionally manipulated the drawings. He doctored the drawings. Haeckel. And yet, this has been taught in the science textbook for many, many years. I came studying this. You came studying this. Again, the question arises, why is still this thing being taught? And you might be saying, maybe they don't know. They know. Scientists, they know. And why this is still being taught in high school. Again, there is a comparative anatomy. Again, this is very familiar. You see, this is a hand of a man. This is a foot of a horse. This is a fin of a whale. And this is a wing of a bat. And what is this figure trying to show is their build-up, their structure is same. There is a humerus. There is a radius ulna in both. There is a carpels, metacarpals, phalanges. That's kind of bone structures. They are basically similarly made. And again, they make an argument. If they have similar kinds of structure, but different kinds of functions, they must be from the same ancestor. Isn't it true? Isn't that what evolutionists claim? My science teacher used to, in our science class, when there is a chapter called evolution. When we came to that evolution chapter, he said, "Today I am going to prove whales, bats, horses are our cousin." And we were getting so interested. How? Like how? And this was the picture he saw, you know. So based on this, he said that, So these horses, these bats are our cousin because we have the same ancestor. Now, yet, this is also not true based on the genetic study. If they are ancestor and if they are similar in structure, they should arrive from the same genes. But yet there is no proof that these organs are under the control of the same genes, which weakens the claim that these have the same kinds of ancestors. Friends, the arguments of evolution is so weak once we dig deeper. Friends, there is nothing to worry about or nothing to afraid about evolutions. How it might be, it might attack the science and it might undermine our faith. So, if evolution is not the case, then what is the explanation? I think explanation is pretty simple. There is the Creator God who created all the organisms. And why do we see the similarity? Maybe because He made those organisms under the same blueprint. That seems more plausible explanation, isn't it? Right? And there is another interesting story about missing links. What is missing links? Do you know? Do you know? So that you do not fall asleep, I want to come forward. You are not feeling asleep already, are you? Yeah, I know it might be a lot to take in this afternoon on science, but I will try to make it as simple as possible. What is missing link? Do you know what Darwin said? There is a gradual transition. When the fishes, do you know what are the 5 classes of Chordata phylum? Do you know what is? Can anyone say what are the 5 classes of Chordata, or the vertebrates? If you've been to the science class, you know this. Mammals, reptiles, amphibians, Pisces, aves, yeah, birds, right? So what does this say? First there was, before mammals were there, what is there? There are the Pisces, the fishes. And the fishes, they gradually develop into some kind of land and water-dwelling animals called the amphibians. Then that develop into reptiles. Then the reptiles all gradually change into aves, and aves, that birds, I mean, that gradually change into mammals. If this were true, then there should be plenty of evidences. In the fossils, we should find this gradual transition of gradual transition of animals. And these are the links to link between different classes. Like the link between Pisces and amphibians, the link between amphibians and reptiles, the link between reptiles and aves. So these are called the links. So if something is transitional between reptiles and birds, if some animal is transitional between reptiles and bird, that transitional animal should have the characteristics of both reptiles and the birds. Do you agree? Yes. Right? So this transitional animal should be half reptile and half bird, because it is linking the reptiles with the birds. But yet, do you know, there has been no such finding that such kind of links exist. Friends, please remember this. When people argue with you using this evolution, you should be able to defend. You should know these facts. You should know this side of the story. We all been hearing one side of the story, and it's time to dig into the another side of the story. Okay? There is no fossil evidence of such kind of links. That means it's missing. That's why the term called missing link. Why this term came? Because there are supposed to be links based on the Darwin's theory, but there are no such links, hence it is missing. That's why missing links. Okay? So, and this evolutionists, they use bunch of handful of evidences, like the one we see in the background, the Archaeopteryx. Again, this is something you read in high school. And how are we taught about this creature, which is called Archaeopteryx? This Archaeopteryx is supposed to be the transitional animal between the reptiles and the birds. That means it is half reptile and half bird. It has claws, okay, and it has like a teeth in the beaks, okay, and that's how we taught. Oh, and we believe it. Wow, this is such a strong evidence of evolution. If such kind of animal actually existed, then sure, evolution might have happened. You know, gradual transition. But you know what, friends? The recent findings has proved this bird, which does not exist anymore, which is already extinct, is actually a bird. It's not half reptile or half bird. So scientists can now do not take this animal as argument for evolution. You see, there is half reptile and half bird. This proves evolution. They cannot say that now, because it has been proven that this is a real bird. Having just teeth in its beak does not mean that it might be reptile. So, friends, please let's keep these points in mind. And you know what? About these missing links, Charles Darwin himself was doubtful that this would be the weakest point in his theory of evolution. I will not read this whole statement which is made by Darwin, but I would just point to the very last sentence. This, and what is this? I think you understand. This perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be argued against my theory. So Darwin himself, he was aware of this flaw in his theory. So if his theory was true, we should lots of linking animals, transitional animals. But since there is no fossil evidence that there is such kind of animals, this might disprove my theory. So, as I told you, Archaeopteryx is now classified as pure bird, not half reptile, not half bird. And there is Java man. I don't know how many of you have heard this Java man. Java man is supposed to be the missing link between the apes and humans. Okay? Now, again, the recent findings has classified this Java man as the real human being, not half monkey and half human. You see, these are the evidences, clear evidences. That means that we were taught wrong. So it is time to strip away all those preconceptions. And this is my humble request, that you strip away all your preconceptions and keep an open mind how we came to be here. Now, again, this is again another very familiar diagram. So Darwin's voice, he went to voice in which island? Yes. Yeah, Galapagos Island. And do you know which ship he made his voice in? Beagle. Very good. You've been I think you were a very good science student. Your science teacher would have been very proud. Yeah. Yes, when Darwin made this voyage in Beagle, in Galapagos Island, he studied finches. Finches is a kind of bird which is shown here. And he found in different islands, they have different beaks, which is adapted to eating the food that was available to them. So this kind of beaks, and you see they have different kinds of beaks, and they are adapted to eat different kinds of food. So what he said was, long time ago to this island, finches might have flown into this island and distributed over different places in this island. So as the time went on, the food distribution also changed, and to adapt to that availability of that food, their beaks also became adaptive to survive. And that's what is called the natural selection. And you might have heard the term survival of the fittest. So now he made this finding, and he made a huge jump. From this finding, he made a huge jump in saying that the living things, if finches, can develop different kinds of beaks, then the living beings, they can adapt themselves. Then some kind of organs, they become more beneficial so that it will be passed on to next generation. And that's how the new species arises, which is actually the basis of natural selection. And so if this were true, then in the very distant past, when there was no life, the molecules combined to form a simple life. That's simple, again, the same story. So he made a huge jump from this simple observation. Okay? But here one thing we have to understand, even though the beaks are different, the finch is still a finch. Do you understand me? This is a finch, this is a finch, this is a finch, this is a finch. But though they have different beaks. So there is no new information added there. There is no new information. So natural selection, you have to understand natural selection is a true process. We have to believe that. There are lots of evidences that natural selection happens. But to say that natural selection eventually is the cause of the evolution, to say that natural selection is the cause that brought the simplest organisms to the complex life form, we have that. That's the lie. That's false. Okay? Natural selection can only explain the variations, not the evolution itself. There is one quote said by a very famous scientist. Natural selection can explain the survival of the fittest, but it cannot explain the arrival of the fittest. You get me? It's not the whole explanation of the evolution. So, are we just sophisticated monkeys? Are we just sophisticated monkeys? Evolutionists say that. We are just the sophisticated monkeys. But are we? Let me show you some data. Here is some, this is the year, 1920s and 1990s. And this is the suicide rates. And this curve shows the suicide rates here, the solid square. And this diamond-shaped dotted line says the property crime, okay, the rates of property crime. And this another triangle dotted line says the childhood contact with the church. So what is happening here is 1920s to 1950s, there is very, very high rate of children going to the church. Okay? And there is very low rate of suicide, and there is very low rate of the property crime. Then something happened in 1950s between this period, 1950s and 1960s. Something happened. Something happened here. What happened was the children going to the church, dramatically they decreased. And the suicide rate, they increased. And the property crime also, it increased. Something happened between these 1950s and 1960s. And do you know what that is? That's when evolution was introduced into the textbook among the high schools. You see? And why this trend? Why this trend? Because evolution says we don't need God. And if we don't need a God, there is no rule, and we can live a life however we want. We can do whatever we want. That's what attractive about this evolution. Because once there is no God, there is no rules, right? There is no rules. And for the teenager who is wanting to be free, what can be more beautiful and attractive than this? Right? We were talking about sexual immorality earlier. Do you know naturalism tells us that we are sexual being before we are spiritual being. That means that naturalism tells us that we are just evolutionary. We have just evolved from the apes, monkeys. You know, they don't have a wedding before they have sex. So you just go have sex whenever you want, whenever, whoever you want with. That's what the naturalism or the evolutionists tell you. Because you are just a sophisticated monkey. Monkey, they do not need to get married before they have sex. You see, it's very dangerous. The teachings of evolution, you might just think it is just saying that man came from ape, but there is more tremendous and vast and dangerous ramifications of these evolutions. Friends, we have to be so careful. We have to be careful. Now you see, here is the God's Word as a foundation, and here is evolution, or the man's opinion, as the foundation. When the creation or God's Word is the foundation, there are laws, there is a marriage, there is standards, and there is a meaning of life. And when there is evolution, man's opinions, there is lawlessness, there is school violence, there is homosexual behavior, there is pornography, there is abortion. What are these? These are all the sinful activities. As I was saying, evolution, it is not just ape to man story. It has dangerous ramifications. Do you agree? Now, this is our church, and so humanism, who believe in the evolution, they try to penetrate the church with their humanism philosophy, evolutionary philosophy. And when there is this creation, God's will is true, it can withhold this attack by the humanists or the evolutionists. But when this this foundation is shaken, this wall, it cannot hold the attacks of the humanism, attack from the humanism. You see, and they are alarmed. And this is the exact situation in the church. Once the strong foundation, the church was built, the exact word of the God has become weakened due to the constant attack of the humanism and evolutionary teachings, the secular teachings. And it has become successful in penetrating even the church. You see, the previous slide, we saw how solid was this foundation. And what is happening here, the evolutionary termites, they are eating away the base, the foundation of the church on which it was built. And all of these are coming, they are collapsing. And do you know how the church today fights? You see? You see here, this is the tower which represents the churches today. And this is the tower which represents the naturalists, which believe in the evolution. Now, these are the ramifications of the evolution. There is abortion, school violence, like we talk about, right? Sexual impurity, immorality, racism, pornography. There's such kind of things, right? And what are the Christians, they are doing is they are attacking just these outward manifestations. You see where I'm going? They are attacking, I'm not saying that that's wrong, okay? We have several proponents of in the Christian society who raise their voice against abortion, raise their voice against the homosexual marriage. That's all good. But we have got to do something more. Because these are just the symptoms. These are just the symptoms of the hidden illness. Curing the symptoms is not the cure, friends. So, you see some Christians, they are attacking in the wrong place. Some are attacking these symptoms. Some are, don't know where he is shooting. And some are asleep. Yes, some are even asleep. You see, that's the situation of our churches today. And what we really should do. And what is the solution? We should fight this battle in 3 fronts. Not just the symptoms, but at the base level, at this body level, where the building stands, and there is the symptoms, the ramifications. So, without that, we don't have a very good chance to survive as Christians if we don't know what is the real problem. So this evolutionary teaching has also crept into the teachings of the Bible. They try to find the marriage between evolution and Bible. They try to merge this evolution with the Bible, and that is very, very dangerous situation. Okay? I had how many minutes do I have? I'm sorry, I just lost the track of time. Yep. So, now, does science contradict God? I will just go through my slides very quickly. So, Dr. Jerry Coyne, professor, said, science and faith are fundamentally incompatible. Science helps religion by disproving its claim. Is that true? Really, science take us away from God? Stephen Meyer, who has a PhD from University of Cambridge, he said, science, when done right, it points powerfully towards God. Okay? How? Let's see. We'll see some evidences from science which points towards God. First, the evidence from cosmology, then evidence from physics, then evidence from biochemistry. Now, from cosmology, what is cosmology? Do you know? It's the study of universe, how it originated, where it will go, how it will last. Now, there is an argument in cosmology. Many years ago, many decades ago, scientists used to believe that the universe was eternal. Universe existed, it had no beginning. Scientists used to believe that. But that all came to change due to the discoveries made in last 5 decades. So almost all scientists on this earth, now they believe that universe had an origin at some point in the distant past. Universe had an origin. Now, then if universe had an origin, then whatever exists must have a cause. Can you think of anything which came out of nothing without any cause? Anything that came into existence must have a cause. So that leads us to the conclusion, universe, if it has the beginning, it must have a cause. And what kind of cause would make such a wonderful universe? It should be immaterial. It should be uncaused. It should be so powerful. It should have its own will to create the universe. And it should be personal. And that description of that cause fits the God in our Bible. You see, the science discovered that this discovery of science that a universe had a beginning powerfully points towards the Creator God. So I'll just jump through this. Now there is another proof from the physics. If you were to go into Mars, suppose you are an astronaut, if you go into the Mars and you came across a dome, a building, let's say, and inside there was life forms, and you could see the dials which are necessary for the life to grow in that place in the Mars. And you find the dial for oxygen control, for the temperature control, for the humidity control, and they could be set anywhere. They could be set anywhere, but they are set in such a way that life in that place would flourish or survive. What does that tell you? Does that happen by chance? No. Immediately you will know that there is some intelligence behind that, right? Similarly, our universe is governed by so many laws, so many physical constants. If we were to make a very, very slight change, then the universe could not have survived. So those fine-tunings of those conditions, who made that fine-tunings? Is it just a chance? No, it's not. Now there is next evidence from the DNA. Our DNA is such a wonderful powerhouse for storage of information. If you have just 1 teaspoon of DNA, do you know? Just 1 teaspoon of DNA. Just think of it like as a peanut butter. You eat peanut butter, right? So imagine you have 1 teaspoon of DNA. Then that amount of DNA can hold information to build all the species that ever existed in this planet Earth, and it would still have a place, room left to store all the information in the book ever published. in just 1 teaspoonful of DNA, and where that information came. Whenever we go to the beach, we can see the ripples on the sand. We know that waves of the sea can make that ripples. But when you walk further along and you find John loves Mary, and there is a heart-shaped drawing with the arrow pushing it, written on the sand, do you think that wave created that? What do you think? Somebody must have intentionally written that thing. That whenever there is an information, we know there is some kind of intelligence behind it. Do you agree? And what is DNA, my friends? DNA is the tremendous, tremendous storehouse of the information. Okay? So God created the universe. That is my final conclusion, that God created universe. And the best news is this God is not just the God of deism, who just created the God and just let it run by itself. It is not an indifferent or distant God who does not care about his creation. But this is a God who loves his creations, who loves his people. And I would like to encourage you, why don't you meet this God tonight? If you are in such kind of situation where your faith is dwindling, you are shaky, I encourage you, you have nothing to worry about. A cosmologist said, in this time, more than any time in the history, we as Christians can hold our head high. Do you know why? Because all the scientific discoveries that have been made, it points towards one creator, God. So friends, let's not be discouraged. Our God exists and he created this universe. Can you say amen, all of you? So, if you have not met this God, I would suggest, please meet him tonight. And if you have not known him deeper, dig deeper. And you can do lots of researches, read on these articles. This book by Lee Strobel, The Case for Creator, this is a good place to start. So I would really, really suggest, I was telling you in the beginning, it is very important for us to defend our faith. So please do research, do investigation, and you will be amazed at what you find. That's my promise. May God be glorified.